I'm really excited because I get to spend time on stage with Tim O'Reilly, who is, I imagine many of you know who Tim is, and so I won't belabor the fact, but I think it's pretty fair to say that the history of Silicon Valley is synonymous with your history in terms of how we at least consume and have been introduced to the ideas that have ended up changing the world. And we're here today because you have a new book coming out.
That's right.
WTF. Oh, thank you. I'll hand that over to you. And we're hoping to make this really interactive. It's Friday afternoon. It's the tail end of the festival. Thank you all so much for coming today. We would love to make this a conversation with all of you. Hopefully you have a glass of wine. Maybe you're on your third or fourth. If not, raise your hands.
Where's mine?
Right. And so let's make this a conversation. And let me start, Tim. So take a big step back with me. What motivated you to write this book? What were you seeing? How many books altogether are you responsible for publishing in your life? Because you've got the O'Reilly books,
I would say, yeah, it would be in the thousands.
Okay.
Just so for people who don't know, I have my own publishing company. This book is actually coming out from Harper Business because I know how to reach my audience, and I wanted to partner with a publisher who could reach people that I was not already reaching, and reach out through the business press. So my company publishes hardcore technology books. So things like how to actually do deep learning, these things that you're hearing about in some of these panels. And we've been doing this for 30 years. And so when in 2000 the Publishers Weekly had it said the internet was built with O'Reilly books. That was kind of a statement that kind of relates to what Charles said. But we also have a big online platform, learning platform, and we run technology conferences. I just came here from our New York AI conference. But what motivated me to write the book is that there's a narrative out there, and it's a narrative that is in the press, in the way we're talking about things even at Aspen Ideas. It's in our system so deeply. And that narrative is that technology is eliminating jobs. And this book is a combination of a memoir, sort of lessons from companies like Uber, Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and then applying them to some of the questions of our economy today. And what I struggled with is that narrative says technology wants to eliminate jobs. And I see two things. First is that technology has traditionally allowed us to do more. And the companies that are most successful are doing more. That's what makes them work. So why are we buying this idea that technology will just get rid of jobs? Why aren't we saying, what will it let us do that is currently impossible? When you take about advertising, that's been an area that's been revolutionized. Don Draper would be out of work in today's advertising economy because it's already being done by robots.
Right.
They're not AIs, but Google matches up and and Facebook give you personalized ads.
Or at least you'd be a guy with a CS degree as opposed to
That's
like
right. The workers at these companies are already robots.
Right.
You could not actually do billions and billions of personalized ads. Every single 3 billion Google searches a day, everyone gets ads just for the person doing the search. So that's something you couldn't do before.
Let me ask a question real quick. How many people in this room have AI in their lives? Raise your hand if you feel like, okay, a couple of you. Now, I think you're wrong. I think oh, thank you.
All
Fantastic.
Right.
This is great. I think everyone in this room actually is using AI all the time. You just might not be aware of it. But for those of you who have AI in your lives, who raise your hand, how does it manifest?
Our son has a startup in Silicon Valley doing AI.
Okay, so a startup in Silicon Valley. The proud parents, yes, sir? So you're in medicine, and it's sort of this AI differential diagnosis. It's proposing things. It means you don't have to remember them. Who else? Yes.
I talk to my phone.
You talk to your phone. Does it talk back?
Yeah, but it knows if I ask about what's the weather. This weekend it'll say Uber's smart.
Right, you're
Aspen
gonna.
this weekend.
I see you're in your schedule. You're going to be skiing this weekend. Let me tell you what the snowfall is going to be. When, yes, sir, back here. Okay, you're working with AI to design a new car. So now what's interesting, what I just heard is we had a doctor, we had someone who, the father of silicon, we have a designer. These are not, I think 10 years ago if we talked about automation and AI, people would think we're talking about blue collar work, right? We're talking about factories. But to your point, AI is in everything now. How many people in this room have an Amazon Alexa at home? They're amazing, right? My kids like talk to it all day. They talk to it more than they talk to me. And it's actually much friendlier with them. So I guess my question is, should we be worried or not about the rise of the robots? Is this going to be good for society or bad? How do I think about that in a sophisticated way?
So basically, robots are fundamentally stupid. They do things really well, one thing really well, and they do what they tell us, what we tell them to do. And so the really critical question I think that we need to be asking is, what are we telling them to do? And in far too much of our economy, we have built a system in which we use automation to cut costs, to enrich people who are already rich, and to reduce the part of the economy that goes, what used to go to workers. Right. We're giving a lot of surplus to consumers because, of course, that's seen as good for business. But we bought into the idea that workers are actually bad for business. If you can get rid of them all, why not? But we've forgotten that an economy is an ecosystem. And if people don't have money, they can't buy your products. And the whole system falls down. And so we actually have to, the master fitness function of our economy around maximizing shareholder value is kind of the rogue AI already. It right. is, in fact, the thing where we have, just like in the Terminator, where we said, okay, there were some boundary conditions, and we set this thing on a path where it became hostile to humanity. We basically built the modern corporation and the modern economy around this idea that we need to fix. We need to debug our economy. It's increasingly automated, and we need to figure out, just like we're figuring out Facebook's fighting with fake news and our ISP fights with spam. We have all kinds of sort of economic spam, which is designed to enrich some small subset of people and impoverish everyone else. And we actually have to come to grips with that as a society.
And in the book, you talk about this, you talk in a couple of chapters about algorithms, the importance, right. and that algorithms are always designed for this fitness, right? That Google has one or two goals, and they write everything to those goals. That Apple has one or two goals, and they design, and for years we've said this is what an efficient company is, right? An efficient company is a company that's focused on its goals and executes on those goals. Mm-hmm. Now the question though is, has something changed about how much thought we should be giving to goals? Is that the problem?
No, I think we're at a point, and this goes back to your question of why did I write this book? We're clearly at a point where something is gnawing at us. And I was at your talk about the power of habit yesterday. How many people were at Charles's talk yesterday? Okay,
thanks for coming.
Talk a little bit about nail biting.
Nail biting
and
right.
habits, and then let's bring that into the broader conversation.
So one of the interesting things about why people there's this big
By the way,
question.
Charles's book, The Power of Habit.
There's this big question in science for a number of years in behavioral science. Why do people bite their nails? Because there must be some reward, right? Every habit has a reward, and it turns out that people bite their nails when they're feeling tension of some kind. And it's because it hurts to bite your nails. Is anyone here a nail biter? A couple of people. So we actually know a lot about nail biters because they tend to be more intelligent than everyone else, so they can talk about what's going on inside their head. So now everyone's like, I'm a nail biter too, yeah. But what's interesting is that when you bite your nails, it's painful, and that pain happens in the same part of our brain as tension. It actually overwhelms and crowds out tension. And our brain prefers pain to tension. Pain becomes enough of a reward that we develop a nail-biting habit because we want to get rid of that tension.
Right. So I heard Charles talk about this yesterday, and I thought, oh my God, this is a perfect description of Donald Trump. Effectively, Donald Trump is our collective psyche nail-biting to get over this tension of inequality, of there's something wrong and we're not quite aware of what it is. And I think in your book, you talk about the beginning of changing a habit is learning to recognize the stimulus.
That's exactly it.
And I think part of what we have to do is we have to correctly diagnose what's eating at us.
Yes.
And then we have to fix it. And my fundamental belief is that we can. The future is up to us. Think about Iowa, 1909. Agriculture was really beginning to be mechanized. The high school movement started in Iowa, where these farmers in these small towns decided that the jobs of the future were going to be in the cities. And they basically taxed themselves to set up schools. 9% of U.S. Children went to high school in 1909. By 1935, it was up to something like 70%. And the high school movement spread. It was this bottom-up thing where people basically said, we're looking at the future and we need to change. And so I look at today's world and I say, wow, our diagnosis is wrong. We're blaming immigrants. We're blaming, technology. We're not blaming the fact that we're not actually working to build a better future. And I think, for example, look at education. We're cutting education. Robert Putnam, the great sociologist, said this wonderful line in a Markle Foundation working group that I was in for a couple of years. He said, every great advance in our society has come when we have taxed ourselves to educate other people's children.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it was a great line. But that idea of how would we rethink education if we were really trying to prepare for the future?
And it's interesting you mentioned that high school movement starts in 1909, which of course is right in the heart of the Industrial Revolution, right? It's right in the heart of this time when people feel tense and anxious because society's changing. Much like today, we're right in the heart of another economic revolution.
Right. But they had a better diagnosis than we have had in our current.
So let's talk about how we get to that diagnosis, because actually my favorite chapter in the book is the one about Lyft and Uber. And it's because of the way you start it. You talk about how you had a consulting group come to the O'Reilly Company to help you guys figure out, you did a whole bunch of different things, what ties this together, and what they helped you realize was something about what your actual purpose is.
Right.
So
basically, we built a business model map of what were the things. The consultants who came to us had this idea that a company, basically a business model is the set of all the activities of the business that work to serve customers and build business value. And how do they all work together? And so they used, for example, Southwest Airlines as an example. So Southwest has point-to-point routes. They don't forward baggage. They don't have seat assignments. They have actually a more highly unionized workforce and highly paid workforce. They have employee stock options. They have all kinds of crazy things that other airlines don't do. And that's what distinguishes their business model from United and American and so on. And it's actually made them for a long time the most profitable airline. They had this competitive advantage. So we kind of did this exercise for my company. We had started doing conferences. We're mostly a publishing company. But we rethought, who are we really? And we said, we're really a company that's about changing the world by spreading the knowledge of innovators. And so that allowed us to launch our online subscription service, which is now the biggest part of our business, launch a venture capital firm, all kinds of things, because we said, our job isn't publishing books. And so in a similar way, I tried to deconstruct Lyft and Uber and try to understand what are the key elements of their business model. And for all the crap that we see about Uber, in particular, because they've got so much wrong, there's a lot of amazing lessons for the future economy there.
Absolutely.
Because first of all, amazing, beautiful customer experience. We have a network and a platform that empowers individuals to deliver that amazing service. Those people are managed by algorithm, but that algorithm can be tuned. And one of the things that I also, this is jumping to another, one of the tools I have for thinking about the future was this idea of managed by algorithm. Once you think, that's a key part of what makes Uber and Lyft tick. They can only deliver this service because the workers are on demand. And a lot of people have focused, that's not like it should be a W-2 job or it should be, you go, no, the future is different because the reason they're able to have a workforce that rises and falls in response to demand is because it is algorithmic.
Because you don't need a person at every level.
That's right. But
go ahead.
I just want to finish. But you kind of think about it for a minute, and you go, oh, wait, Walmart also uses algorithms to manage their workforce, so does McDonald's. But those algorithms tell people when to show up. They're kind of a graft onto the old model, and they have all kinds of features where they take away agency from the workers. And they've figured out that don't give people more than 29 hours because then you don't have to pay health benefits. Oh, they're exploiting the system in a variety of ways. We used to think we needed people for full week shifts, and now we realize we need people for 2 hours here and 4 hours here.
Which is terrible. It totally disrupts their life. Right?
Terribly disruptive. And
so here, what I love about this idea is, it seems to me that what you're really saying is, we need to clarify what our purpose is, right? I need to know what O'Reilly actually does.
Right.
O'Reilly spreads great ideas.
Yeah.
I need to know what Uber actually does. And what's interesting about that is that embedded in that is actually a value statement. It's not a transactional statement. It's a value statement about what you think is important in the world. And so let me throw this out to the audience, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. The company you work at, or the company that you've started, or that your son has started, if you had to make a value statement about what that company's purpose is, not what its business is, but what its purpose is, do you know what that is? Who feels like they know? Yeah?
Quiet down and listen to
Wait
the...
for Can you stand up, please?
I'm Deborah. Quiet down and listen to the experience around you.
Oh, interesting. And what kind of company is it?
It's outdoor education.
Okay, that's great. Who else? Who else? Yeah, there.
To proactively help people become better versions of themselves.
Okay, to proactively help people become better versions. And what is the company?
Snack Nation, we provide all the snacks at the summit.
Okay. Which is interesting, right? Because I think if you told me you ran a snack company, I don't think I would say, oh, it's to let people become better versions of themselves. But it's probably this vision that drives and motivates. Anyone else that, yeah, or back here.
My name is Michael Rothrock, and our company creates strategic alignment across an entire company from the top all the way down to the bottom.
That's interesting. And what actually does your company, like what's the product?
It's SaaS, software as a service.
Okay. So let me ask you, when you think about the future and you think about the changes that we're going through, how important is it being able to make this value statement versus being able to describe a business model? And are those one and the same, or are they different?
Well, I think the business model comes from the value statement. And it also comes from a recognition of the work that you do. And I was interested in a panel that I just came over from where the question was, what jobs are going to be automated away? And it's the wrong question. The right question is, what work needs doing that we can use automation to help us with? Why are we so relentlessly focused on what we're getting rid of? And a great example of this came from my friend Tim Huang, who as a programmer was also a lawyer. And he worked for the EFF for a while, and then he's now working at Google on their policy team. But he described how he was given all this. He's an entry-level lawyer. He's given these rote tasks, and so he automated them, being a programmer. And every day he did the work that they gave him with fewer billable hours. And he said, I quit just ahead of being fired. And because that ability to automate the tasks conflicted with the business model of the law firm, which was to charge as much as possible for billable hours. But there are startups now that are going to put those law firms out of business because they're going, wow, what an amazing opportunity to expand demand. This guy, Josh Browder, has cleared something like 24,000 parking fines in England with a robot lawyer. He's now working to automate the process of applications for asylum for immigrants. A lot of the work we're doing at Code for America, my wife over there has a startup, not a startup, a nonprofit that basically is trying to streamline government operations so that people can get benefits more quickly and more easily. Because automation lets us actually improve. So to me, if you know what you want to make better about the world, that's both a value statement and it also becomes the core of a business model.
Yeah, and what's interesting, what I like about this is that is that it embraces the changes that are coming, as opposed to says
That's
that
right.
there's something to be scared about in the changes that are coming.
Yeah.
It's focusing on the fact that we're losing certain jobs actually means the future is better, as opposed to worse.
And I think individuals as well as companies need to think that way.
I totally agree. And I want to talk about how we apply some of the stuff you've learned to individual lives. Before I do, I also want to ask, though, about what this means for the changes that we need to make in who we're funding, how we're educating. And I warned Steve, in case that I would ask him a question, because you're spending a ton of time funding companies in rural America. You're working with JD Vance now. How does this work into areas that traditionally don't get VC funds in how you make decisions on what you think deserves the money?
First of all, I've known Tim for more than 25 years, and he's one of the brightest, most thoughtful people. And we had a lot more Tims, we'd have a better world. I do differ a little bit, though, the way he framed it, which is, well, of course I agree that technology can enable us to do things better. And I do worry about the implications in terms of job loss. And the agriculture situation was referenced. 200 years ago, over 90% of us worked on farms. Now it's less than 2% because the technology made farming easier. But thankfully, we then, partly through the school system, went on to create the Industrial Revolution, which created a bunch of jobs. And when that started declining, created the technology revolution. So the question is, how do we create the next revolution? My concern right now is we're only backing, or predominantly backing, entrepreneurs in a few places like Silicon Valley. Last year, 75% of venture capital went to 3 states: California, New York, and Massachusetts. There are zip codes in California that get more venture capital than all of Colorado, even though Colorado is doing pretty well. So essentially, we're backing entrepreneurs doing disruptive things in a few places that are destroying jobs in other places, but we're not offsetting that, at least in part, by backing the entrepreneurs in those other places that can create jobs in other places. And this last election, we saw that. This notion that a lot of people felt left out and left behind, because they were left out and left behind. So how do we figure out a way to include them in this future so they don't fear it, they embrace it? And a lot of it does come down to jobs and having people in certain parts of the country not really in tune with what's happening in the middle of the country is not helpful. So I just encourage everybody, a lot of people from California, New York, and Massachusetts, but most of you are from other places. What can you do to support your community? Now, my argument was while you might be able to do some things, I'm sure are doing some things philanthropically, maybe the best investment is the sports, some of those little startups, which someday might become the big companies that anchor your communities and create jobs in your community. So I think we have to think about this in terms of leveling the playing field so everybody everywhere has a shot at the American dream, and we are figuring out a way to have a more inclusive and more regionally dispersed innovation economy.
And that's interesting because not only, I feel like, is VC money going to these 3 places, how many people in this room don't live in New York, California, or Massachusetts? Okay, good number of you. Now let me ask you this. How many of you would say that the Amazon genie comes to your house at least once a week? So much like the VC dollars, if you're giving your money to Amazon, frankly, if you're giving your money to Whole Foods, which is now going to be part of Amazon, it's the same cycle, right? You're not necessarily investing in your community, even though Whole Foods feels like our community. It feels like something that we have an attachment to. It's a big corporation. It's not necessarily our neighbors.
So I do want to pick up on something else. First of all, Steve, I agree with you. I mean, I'm not saying that, it'll all naturally sort out. I think we have to make better choices if we want to create those jobs. And you're obviously focused on a really important piece of that. I want to just expand on it a little bit. It's not just where we invest in startups, it's the kind of startups we invest in. I think one of the things that's, to my mind, really wrong about Silicon Valley is that for every real business that VCs are investing in, I would say that 10 of the businesses that VCs are investing in today are actually financial instruments. They're companies that are designed to be bought or by some bigger company. They're really not that dissimilar from the financial products that Wall Street gave us in 2008. Where it was sort of like, well, if we can find a customer for it, like these banks, that's great. They weren't real businesses, and it used to be that a real business had customers, and to be sure, advertising-based businesses can be real businesses. You know, Google has customers, but so many of the startups in this frothy Silicon Valley ad ecosystem are really simply designed to be acquired and never designed to be a real business serving actual customers. And I think one of the things that's so exciting to me about the Rise of the Rest tour that Steve is doing, and we have actually, our fourth incarnation of our venture fund is focused on what my partner Bryce Roberts calls Indie VC, and it's all focused on businesses that are trying to get to cash flow and real customers as opposed to you know, these sort of let's get meteoric growth and hope that somebody buys us kinds of startups. And that's what's so amazing about the opportunities in the rest of this country, because it's actually selling real stuff to real people or doing stuff for real, you know, it has to be a real company. And we need more real companies.
So let me ask you this. Having written this book, how has your life changed? I mean, as you've thought about these ideas, as you've gotten more sophisticated about these perspectives, are you making different choices now? Are you seeing things differently in your own life?
Oh, totally. I mean, first, I mean, there's small things. You know, just becoming more aware of the immense gulf between my life and the life of people. You know, I carry a bunch of cash around, and I'm giving it to homeless people in San Francisco every day because I'm going, holy shit, you know. Sorry for the language, but you know,
it's a San Francisco word.
You know, how entitled we've become, you know, and that we, the richest country in the world, have beggars on our streets. You know, that's shameful. That's shameful, and so. Well,
and we are,
you know, but so that's a small thing, but a lot of it is also just really. I've started to think a lot, for example, about the role of these giant platforms in our society, and think about the role of small business in our society. And in an ideal world, the platforms enable small business. You know, so you think about there are these green shoots, you know, where people are making a living on YouTube, or people are making a living via Airbnb or as an Uber driver, but increasingly, there's this question of, do the platforms compete against the people who make their service possible, or do they really take seriously their responsibility to the people who make what they do possible?
I think it's a great question. And I think that that's probably the next frontier, is holding these companies accountable to our values the same way that we feel very comfortable doing with, like, Nike, right? Like, we all feel comfortable with the physical goods that we touch, keeping them holding them accountable to our values, but we haven't reached that point with many of our digital offerings. How many of you have checked Facebook in the last 48 hours? Oh, pretty much half the crowd. How many of you have ever sent a note to Facebook telling them what you think they should do differently? Couple people, right? But what's crazy to me is, if we had, say, the New York Times, where I work, if the New York Times started publishing fake news or made fake news possible, 90% of our subscribers.
Donald Trump tells you every day.
That's true. We hear every single day over Twitter from our readers about what we're doing wrong. But most of us don't communicate with Facebook or with Twitter. We don't see it as a company that we can have this relationship with, where it's a two-way relationship, where we're giving them input.
Well, and I think some of that actually, you know, New York Times and other newspapers have always had explicit mechanisms for doing that. And companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon and Twitter have actually made it very difficult to communicate directly with them.
No, I think it's, okay, so let me ask one more question, and then we'll take your questions. How many of you are worried about the future? How many of you think, yeah? And why is that? What's ma'am right here in the white shirt? Yeah, I know. This is what happens when you raise your hand. But it's going to be, you're going to answer this question well. I know that you are. This one right here.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, that's what you're worried about?
Yes.
And what do you mean, though? Like, yeah, he's been president for a little while. We're not at war.
Global warming.
Okay.
I'm frightened that global warming.
Okay. What else? What are other people worried about? You can just shout them out. Yeah, ma'am.
I'm worried about my kids' experiences and how to kind of filter out some of the anxieties that we feel as adults for them as they're growing up, so that they don't grow up with the same anxieties or worse because of all the problems they know that they're encountering.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah?
I'm
You worry about social media. How so? What do you mean? What do you worry about it?
I worry on the influence of social media on the young ones.
Yeah, and is that your son's sitting next to you, and that's a nice kiss. Because
that would be great to share on social media
yet, right?
if we had it.
That would be good on social media. Sir, right here.
I worry about somebody getting hold of a nuclear device, nuclear bomb, or our friend in North Korea, which is going to make everything else seem quite trivial if we start throwing these things around.
Right. I think that's yeah.
Oh, I worry about the hatred in the world and the freedom that people feel to express their hatred towards different people of different ethnicities and people of different backgrounds.
Aren't you glad you came on a Friday afternoon to hear about all the things that we should be terrified about? Let's take one more back here.
I worry about men who are in their 50s with no education and who don't see a future for themselves.
That's a great, right? Basically, if you're 50 and you lose your job, you're never going to earn as much as you once earned in your life, right? It's all downhill. So let me ask you, and thank you for those, and feel free to save what you're worried about until 11 o'clock tonight. Okay, so Tim, let me ask you this. So the name of the book is What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us. These are all things to be worried about for the future. Mm-hmm. Should we be worried?
Absolutely. I think we should be worried and we should take action.
And what does that action look like? How is that? What is that?
Well, first of all, the many policy, specific policy interventions that I think we should make. It's pretty clear that part of the rise of Donald Trump and the failure of Hillary Clinton was this appeal to this notion that our society was in the throes, under the control of the financial industry. And it's actually pretty much true. 25% of all corporate profits in America go to financial firms now. 85% of all corporate investment goes to stock buybacks and dividends. I read the recent, after the ouster of Jeff Immelt at GE, I went and read the white paper of the activist investor that invested in 2015 and started the process to get him out. And it was really interesting because it was this series of graphs that showed how GE outperformed its competitors in every real economy measure, but not in stock price. And their recommendation was that GE should borrow a whole lot of money and then spend that money to buy back their stock to artificially increase the stock price. Who gives a damn about the stock price except the financiers? Because GE doesn't need it. They have plenty of money to invest in their businesses. Jeff's been doing that just fine, right? So they don't need anything from capital markets. Capital markets, there's a bunch of people who are saying, GE, you're not giving us the kind of pop that we want. So we want to engineer you to give us a pop. There's a bunch of people who are manipulating our real economy, for the benefit of the financial economy. And Donald Trump, for all the things he did as doing wrong, recognized that, and he spoke to it. Now, of course, he has not actually done anything about it.
Right.
But I do think we have to actually start reinvesting in the real economy. And that's probably the biggest sort of policy thing. But there's all kinds of other things. We need to actually deeply invest in education. Again, it's been the solution every time we've had these. Yeah. And that means, for example, we have to, there's this great line from Hal Varian, who's the chief economist at Google. And it sounds sort of heartless. But he said, if you want to understand the future, just look at what rich people do. And you think, what the heck? But then you think, oh yeah, rich people used to have cell phones and nobody else did. Now everybody has cell phones. Rich people used to travel around, and now everybody does. You have soccer hooligans who travel all over Europe following their teams, right? So what do rich people do for education? They put their kids in schools with small class sizes, with a completely different kind of curriculum than you have in public school. So if we were doing it right, we would do what those people in 1909 Iowa did. We'd have a massive investment in education to have smaller class sizes. We'd be out there recruiting the best possible teachers who could guide our students to be much more exploratory and to learn how to learn, as opposed to learning kind of the rote disciplines that we used in the 19th and 20th century. And you look right there, we would actually be creating millions of jobs in education, which is one of those industries that the productivity of machines should be freeing us up to do. But we're not. We're just taking that productivity and putting it in the bank.
I absolutely agree. And what's interesting is I think this ties back to the start of the conversation. And we're going to go to questions in just 1 second, which is, in many ways, the AI that is the strongest AI is actually all of us, right? When we say, I'm going to distribute my stocks in a way because I just want to maximize shareholder value, right? I want to get the highest profits. You're not making a decision about what you're doing with your stocks, right? You're acting like an AI, like a piece of program. Like you have a goal and you'll do what it takes to get to that goal. When we say, I want to eat a certain way, so I go to Whole Foods, I want to get my goods delivered as fast as possible, that's more important than where they come from, so I'm going to buy from Amazon. We are the AI.
We're back to the power of habit.
Right.
We have all these bad habits as a society, and we need to actually change some of those habits.
And at least
if we
be
want to
aware
improve
of them. Yeah. So okay, so let's go to some questions in the audience.
Right up here.
Yep, we got.
Come in.
And I'm going to try and take the next question from a woman. So if you're gender inclined that way, get ready.
Good call. Sure, yeah, of course. I work a lot in rural America, and I can think of quite a lot of new industries that are happening around cities. So technology jobs. I see more service jobs, so people becoming coaches and similar roles. I see people actually moving from cities to the land, sort of to start farming. I see that a lot in the Bay Area and New York too. But and Steve, maybe you have an interesting opinion here. What I often wonder is, what are the kinds of jobs that are maybe allow people to stay in small towns, and what is the kind of innovation that's happening there and new parts of the economy? So I wonder if that's something you have a view on.
Yeah, I don't have sort of deep insights into that, other than regional insights. For example, where I lived for many years in Sonoma County, there's now a huge weed industry, but there's new forms of agriculture that certainly. We were in a session was earlier today. I've forgotten. About rural America. It was in the Pepke Library. A bunch of people here from Aspen actually has a project in this area, and. Certainly, specialty food production is certainly one of those industries. Tourism, unfortunately, is one. They were talking, for example, like towns suddenly realizing, oh, we have an asset. There's this town that Willa Cather was born in, now suddenly made itself into a destination. They've kind of thought that through. But we're also talking about the role of immigrants. Actually, something like, I think it was 30% of immigrants end up in rural America, not in cities, and and they actually build their own economy. And then the question is, well, how do you integrate it with the local rural economy? Because one of the things that we have to remember, and by the way, absolutely great book if you haven't read it, is Yuval Noah Harari's *Sapiens*, which makes the case that what we collectively believe is how society progresses. It's a set of fictions that we're able to sell to each other, and an economy is fundamentally a fiction. We basically agree to exchange things with each other, and so it's sort of interesting when you transplant a bunch of immigrants and they start exchanging things with each other because, hey, we need a Hmong store here in some small town. Suddenly there's a Hmong store and people come and patronize it, and the secret, I think, of the future economy, of really any economy, is sort of captured in this wonderful idea of Clayton Christensen, the Harvard Business School professors, from 2004. He wrote what he called the law of conservation of attractive profits. And it's that when one thing becomes commoditized, something else becomes valuable. And I use that in my explanation of how open source software would lead to the rise of big data. But it also applies to, say, microbrews, or food in general. Food became a commodity, and what did we do? We elaborated on it. We found ways to make it valuable again by adding in ideas. This is organic food. It's not just food. Right. And it's organic. Oh, wait, it's not just organic. It's fair trade. Not all this coffee is single origin. We decommoditize it by mixing in ideas. And you think, many of you here are older, you remember growing up when in your city there was probably an Italian restaurant and a French restaurant and a Chinese restaurant, and that was it, right? And now there's, in any wealthy area, there's hundreds of different ethnic restaurants and people competing to create all of these innovative ways to serve something that is fundamentally a commodity. And we actually have a huge, wonderful creative economy ahead of us. That's also what happened with fashion. When those weavers were put out of business, by the machine looms, we actually started going, oh, we can make more different kinds of clothes. They can be changed out. Not only
this is what capitalist innovation is.
That's right.
Is convincing you to pay money for something.
So I guess the same thing applies to small towns.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sylvia, and I live here in Aspen. And my question was, what job of the future do you think will have the most positive impact on the world?
Oh, that's an most positive impact. Not necessarily the one that will have the biggest paycheck.
This is probably not the right answer, but it's one that I do think about a lot, and that is, I think dealing with climate change is going to be for our children and our grandchildren what World War II was for our parents and grandparents. There's this massive amount of work that needs to be done to basically completely restructure the economy of the 21st century, or we're all going to basically go down in flames. And so if I had to pick one thing, it would be, okay, how do I actually start thinking about how do we rethink and remake the 21st century so that we get through it?
That's interesting. Sir, right here.
Hi, I'm Thomas. What is your take on the creation of large tech monopolies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and others? And do you think the US government could and should act the way it did in the past with the regular economy?
My thought on antitrust, it kind of goes back actually to a book I read part of many years ago called The Great A&P and the Future of Small Business in America. So there was a landmark antitrust case involving A&P, which was the first national grocery chain. And they were trying to decide whether sort of harm to small businesses was grounds for antitrust. And they made this critical decision that no, as long as it was good for consumers, it was okay. And I think we need to go revisit that discussion, because the fundamental conflict today is really not going to be between big companies. They've kind of all come to accommodation and they fight it out. It's between these massive platforms and the people in their ecosystem. And in my career in technology, I watched how first Microsoft, there was a thriving ecosystem of PC software vendors, and Microsoft used their platform dominance to basically take more and more of the value. I've watched how Google has bit by bit done that. They used to send all their traffic to everybody else's website, and it was like, no, actually we can deliver more user value by doing it ourselves. And so to me, I think there's a really interesting question for antitrust or some kind of legal intervention, which is the responsibility, how do we manage the responsibility of platforms to the economic actors who make up that platform? Now, I've also argued that, good business sense for a company to feed its ecosystem and to keep it healthy. I think when they don't, there's just all kinds of different ways that big businesses, there was a USA Today this morning had a story about how, the big, chain stores have actually squeezed independent trucking firms who are part of their ecosystem, who they depend on.
Right.
But they basically forced truckers into bankruptcy, because they're basically trying to maximize their profits.
It's incredibly punishing.
So understanding what the legal regime should be for these big platforms, which do bring efficiency to the economy, but the relationship to all the small businesses that they depend on and that depend on them,
really interesting.
I think is a really fertile area for investigation.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Got one here?
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Oh, great.
Cheers. Mr. O'Reilly, I'm a big fan. I read a lot of your articles, particularly on government innovation. I'm a visitor here. I've lived in 5 different countries, and I just wanted to share an observation and get your reflections on it. Whenever I come to the States, I've never been somewhere that feels more atomized, where individuals are more segmented from each other. And there's an ideological commitment to this idea of liberty and freedom, but also it leads to a lot of radical self-reliance. In most other countries you visit, you have a lot of social commons and other sorts of things. And here, when you speak about those sorts of things, there is very little appreciation for it. The other thing I also notice is there isn't a very strong, compelling narrative about what a future society here would look like. One that isn't necessarily atomized, where individuals climb up some ladder and make it to the top, but something that creates more social integration. I'm just wondering, when you look at technology, most of the technology we're using are things that social scientists and sci-fi authors wrote about 30 years ago. Should we be spending some time building narratives about what the next 10 years should look like, economy on mutuality or other sorts of things? Because I don't see the U.S. progressing as it should.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're completely right. Going back to Bob Putnam again, he has this great line from some of his early research about rich versus poor communities in Italy. And he said he discovered that the rich communities were not civic because they were rich. They had become rich because they were civic. And that ability to have a shared vision, I think, has fallen away in America. And this narrative, this sort of Randian narrative taken over Silicon Valley, but it's really taken over our financial markets of, that the people who rise to the top have done so by some virtue, I think really does need to change. Because fundamentally, when we believe different things, we act differently. And I think you're absolutely right. We have to first have a vision of who we can be together. And that needs to be a shared vision where, we have this polarization where it's either, raw, unfettered capitalism or it's communism, all this stuff going back to the 50s, or it's, socialism or it's, no, there's a kind of rich society that we could be building that's so amazing, where we could be living, amazing lives. And, and the fact is, those of us who are here at Aspen Ideas do get to live those kinds of lives where we have meaningful communities. And by the way, I love what Mark Zuckerberg is doing with the work. He's trying to understand how does Facebook get used to create not this kind of fake engagement that led to fake news, but meaningful communities. And I think that online platforms can help people to find each other and to engage in really meaningful ways. But I also think there's a profoundly local aspect of it. And
Absolutely.
We had this one guy who worked with us in the early days of Code for America. And he said probably the single best thing that you could do for civic engagement is actually to have regular block parties. How do you get to know your neighbors? How do you build local resiliency? How do you have real faces?
And how do you define that in a way that you get to come to Aspen and meet people that you wouldn't have met otherwise, and they challenge your ideas? So we're almost out of time, so I want to ask one other question, which is, the book comes out in October, right? WTF, what's the future? Besides buying the book when it comes out in October or pre-ordering on Amazon, it's available now.
Thank you, Charles.
Everyone in this room, everyone's going to leave tomorrow. They're going to go home.
Yeah.
In the next 3 or 4 days, they're going to have an opportunity to make one choice that will make the future better. Mm-hmm. What is the choice that they should make? What should they do?
I think everyone has to make their own choice, because it really is that orientation that says, oh, my fundamental job in this world is to leave it better than I found it. And you look around, if you are, homeless and out of work, clean up your encampment. If you are wealthy, you go, wow, what do I do to make this world better? You have lots and lots of choices, and I would say, for example, for people who are already rich, a lot of the traditional philanthropies are not actually making the world a better place. We're going to add a few more dollars to the endowment of a very rich university, or we're going to put our name on a building. Not so good. I go tackle hard problems, engage with, so.
That sounds pretty good advice to me. Thank you all so much for coming. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.